Hey everybody, and welcome to a brand new series I'm going to be doing over here on the YouTube channel, kind of, taking advantage of the longer format we have access to over here. We're going to be talking about your Bill of Rights in this series. Now, this is the first video, so we're going to be talking about your First Amendment. As we go on, we're going to cover all 10, but I have a question for you right here on the opening. What are the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment? If you know them, go ahead, scroll down, and leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know what the 5 freedoms are. If you didn't know the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment right off the top of your head on that pop quiz, don't feel too bad, but the reason I asked that question is because it's impossible for us as American citizens to defend and protect the rights that we don't even know that we have. Real quick, before we dive into all this too much, I will be providing in the description a link that'll take you to the text of the United States Constitution. So if for some reason you don't want to take my word for this, feel free, look it up yourself. So I'm not just going to leave you hanging. The 5 freedoms of the First Amendment are as follows: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. Now let's talk about what it means to have the freedom of religion in the United States. Well, from a certain perspective, you could view that as the freedom from theocracy. Theocracy being the rule from a religious elite. You can look as a historical example to the Church of England. People who preached against the theology of the Church of England, the official theology of the state. They were burned. They were literally killed. They were burned at the stake for being heretics. We have a protection that our government cannot establish a religion, a state religion like the Church of England, and then prescribe that religion over everyone in the country, which is a fantastic thing to have. In addition, with freedom of religion, the government has no business telling you how you can freely worship your God. They can't tell you who your God is, and they cannot tell you how you worship him. Next, we have the freedom of speech. You may think, well, of course I know what freedom of speech is, and in fact, if you guessed anything in the comments, I'm certain that you knew you had freedom of speech. But some people will tell you, well, freedom of speech, is it absolute? Is it kind of relative? And what the Supreme Court has said is that your freedom of speech is not technically absolute, meaning you can't just say whatever, whenever, however you want. The most famous example is you'll probably get in some legal trouble if you go into a mall or a crowded theater and you start screaming that there's a fire. If a little old lady gets trampled, you're probably going to be held responsible for that because there was no fire. Obviously, if there is a fire, you get to yell that there's a fire. But the other thing that you obviously cannot do under the First Amendment is you can't use your freedom of speech to say, hey, you should go firebomb somebody's car. That's a call to action. That's a call to violence. That's not protected speech under the First Amendment. But the First Amendment, we do have the freedom of speech, so I can say whatever I want. For example, about the government, I can say, Joe Biden is stinky and he looks weird and he's kind of creepy. That is, I'm constitutionally protected by my freedom of speech to say Joe Biden is kind of creepy. Next, we have the freedom of press, which is very similar in a lot of ways to the freedom of speech. Just imagine most of the freedoms that you have under freedom of speech, they also apply to the press. This means that whether CNN or Fox or anyone else, if they want to present an article that doesn't, maybe shine a positive light on the current administration, they won't be prosecuted or punished by the federal government. The government can't come in to the press and say, hey, buddy, listen, you can't post that negative story about me. That's the freedom of the press. Next up, we have your freedom to assemble, your freedom of assembly. That has been actually kind of interestingly interpreted by the Supreme Court to include all sorts of assemblies. That could be a church assembly, political affiliation, or it could be something as small and seemingly insignificant as your local, book club that you and some of your friends have at your house on a Wednesday afternoon. That's your freedom of assembly, and the government cannot encroach upon that. Last and certainly not least is the freedom, the right to petition your government for redress of offenses. That means that if your government, remember we talked about creepy Joe Biden, I have the freedom of speech to call him creepy just then, but I also have the freedom to petition him to say, listen, old man, I think you did something wrong. Let's say maybe in a hypothetical, I'm sure none of us know that this is currently happening, but maybe his administration begins to, attack the Second Amendment rights of the citizens. Well, we as the citizens, we have the right to petition him to say, listen, I, as an American citizen, disagree with what you, as the President of the United States, have done, which may not sound all that revolutionary or unbelievable to us as Americans because we grew up with that right. But all around the world right now and historically, If you criticized the crown, if you petitioned your government, you had a darn good chance, and in some places you still do right now, of being thrown in jail. So our right to petition our government is incredibly, incredibly important. Hopefully now you have a fundamental, just a basic understanding of what the 5 freedoms within the First Amendment are, and you're more well prepared to protect and defend those freedoms. Obviously, there is a lot of nuance that goes into certain constitutional and particularly First Amendment issues. The court has made a plethora of rulings. In fact, I believe the First Amendment to be the very most litigated amendment in the entire United States Constitution. There are a lot of court cases and a lot of decisions, and there are, if you want to go to law school, you'll take entire semesters just on the First Amendment. But the good news is we as American citizens, we don't all have to be constitutional attorneys. We can have a fundamental, basic understanding of our rights, our First Amendment rights as American citizens. And I will leave you with this. Keep in mind, no matter what the federal government or even your local governments do, your rights are not given to you by government. They are given to you by God Almighty and protected by the government. If you guys made it this far, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Maybe you learned something out of it. If you did, please be sure, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And then keep an eye out, watch for the next installment of this series where we're going to be talking about the Second Amendment. You guys take care. God bless. Keep me in your prayers. Keep your country in your prayers. And I will see you next time.